Swimming with care at Windermere. Outdoor swimming in the UK and Republic of Ireland is having a zeitgeist moment, with participation often motivated by exercise, competition, socialisation, joy and perceptions of restorative human well-being. And there were various booms during the COVID-19 lockdowns for those that had access to open waters, and there's been an outpouring of autobiographical, artistic, commercial and academic influences. Now, there's been a very positive framing of the psychological and the physiological responses within controlled cold water exposure and the social benefits of swimming or dipping within groups and peers, and I support that. At the same time, these understandings can carry universal assumptions, neglecting the site-specific influences and broader inequities around access, participation, and the environmental challenges, including water quality. Also, much of this research has been dominated by coastal spaces. In response, my research has questioned the social and cultural relationships between outdoor swimming and environmental health at Windermere. To do this, I undertook a 12-month wet ethnography, visiting bathing sites Rayrig Meadow and Miller Ground 100 times, 40 of which included swim-along interviews. Windermere is a hugely studied lake, and it's big. It's got 2 basins, it's 10.5 miles long, connected by an even bigger catchment area, and it hosts a highly contested ecology of leisure, tourism, agriculture, residents, cultural heritage, conservation, industry, and utility. And Windermere's water quality is influenced by local and global environmental pressures. There is evidence of the lake warming through climate change, declines in iconic freshwater species, and there are multiple local wastewater sources, including from private water companies, private septic tanks, misconnections, and agricultural and urban runoff. There are concerns of nutrient enrichment, blue-green algal blooms, and potentially pathogenic bacterial indicators. There's also the spread of invasive non-native species, plastic pollution, and perhaps pharmaceutical pollution too. Despite these water quality pressures, Windermere sees recreational and competitive swimming all year round, alongside other conflicting water users, all fighting for the same limited public space, including Windermere's 4 designated public bathing sites. Now, evidence of human ill health from swimming at Windermere is heightened, yet still anecdotal and minimal. But that does not mean that we should dismiss both human and non-human health concerns. Also, there are complications in the wildly different approaches taken to monitor and communicate water quality and concerns of human ill health. There are conflicting knowledges influenced by private water companies, politicians, regulators, the partnerships, ecologists, swim researchers, local and national activists, newspapers, documentaries, and social media is a huge, huge influence. But also these knowledges of ill health are formed within the swimming communities, and of course, swimmers' own personal accounts and histories. Recognizing all of this, I needed to be immersed in the regular swimming community, so I took inspiration from Clifton Evers' wet ethnography and ideas of polluted leisure. A wet ethnography included being in and out of the water, staying responsive to the different ethical questions, the subjective responses, the more than human factors influencing these swimming practices. So I hung out with Windermere for a year at different times of the day, sometimes on my own, other times with members of the recreational swim communities. I made general observations about swimming and lake activity, the water, the weather conditions. I took photos, videos, diary entries, absorbing and reflecting on feelings and atmospheres. For me, that's a big part of ethnographic work. I also undertook 40 swim-along interviews with swimmers and dippers, a method coined by researchers Hannah Denton and Kay Aranda. These interviews questioned what we noticed about ourselves and around us, including our bodily responses, questions of access, community, swim safety, water quality, even swim kit. There were pre, during, and post-swim reflections, video recording in situ with a GoPro 10 mounted to my inflatable tow float. 6 were audio interviews on the shoreline. Together, this generated over 350,000 words that I then spent 2 months carefully analysing after the fieldwork. And the interviews were also careful. There was no expectation of time, distance, or kit other than a tow float, as swimming safety and visibility is still really important to emphasise. We would adapt to our needs and the weather and water conditions, and on one occasion, we had to adapt to an onshore interview when seeing a significant blue-green algal bloom. There were different swimming abilities, confidence levels, and neurodivergence came up more than I anticipated as well. Some had pre-existing health conditions, challenges, trauma. There were some really heavy personal motivations for swimming shared that would often outweigh any concerns of water quality and ill health. Regular swimmers are continually negotiating perceptions of wellness and illness, but my claim is that the heavy motivations to swim often outweigh concerns of ill health for regular swimmers. And ironically, swimming in potentially polluted waters can still be positive for human well-being. As Steve suggests post-swim, mentally I feel cleaner, but physically I know I'm not. Or as Martha suggests, should the company stop putting shit in here? Yeah, that'd be nice. But I choose not to be too conscious of it because it feels very much out of my control. These are the things I enjoy, and I don't want to stop. 5 out of 40 participants I interviewed recalled previous experiences of ill health, including vomiting, diarrhea, and skin rashes, some of which included from contact with an algal bloom or following prolonged long-distance immersion. 35 participants confidently suggested being asymptomatic. I also have never experienced these symptoms from swimming at Windermere. But that does not mean that we should dismiss these health concerns. Some people might not share their symptoms, others may be more susceptible. Also, swimming distance can churn your stomach up. So many factors pinpointing this really challenging. In terms of responsibility, some reported the private water company to blame for all this. For others, it was private septic tanks, misconnections, agricultural runoff. Again, pinpointing those localized sources, really hazy. Many just did not know. Interestingly, only 4 participants mentioned climate change, which for me, really alarming. But interestingly, conflicting users and values alongside the visual impact of litter often came up long before discussions of sewage and algal blooms. In terms of taking care in the water, some swimmers avoid Windermere at certain times, or they adapt their practice. They keep their head above the water following heavy rainfall. Now, most regular swimmers would not swim in sight of a significant algal bloom. Still, some persist, some dismiss, some say it's not as bad as it used to be. Now, I found that the sharp cold water temperatures can overpower concerns of illness, but many also sink their concerns to avoid conflict with their motivations to swim or even with their peers. Some feel like they must take a side within the swimming communities. And underneath all of these relationships, this word care kept coming up. Assessing bodily needs, visibility, body temperatures, solidarity within the swimming community, and care with and for these shared freshwater environments. Or even suggestions that some people don't care. As Sarah suggests, I think that there's a fee to pay for being outdoors, and it's that you should care more. And it's funny because we can assume what Sarah means here, but yet defining the word care is still so difficult. It's vague and it's slippery. Care is often understood as advocating for the needs of others through compassion and empathy, minimizing damage and risk, giving attention or even an act of helping others survive. But it can also be detrimental. You may swim for your own well-being or sense of self-care, yet your presence may be unbeneficial to other users or to the more than human, through the spread of invasive non-native species, bodily excretion, microplastics on our swim kit, and potentially the chemicals on our skin. Still, while all swimmers are entangled, I do not see the swimmer that forgets to dry their swim socks having more responsibility than the manufacturer of those socks. And there's tension in claiming those swimming in an algal bloom carry the same responsibility or agency as a private water company, a septic tank owner, or the government that distributes funding and regulatory powers. Because the notion of care can also be a form of control, a veil, a way of averting responsibility, placing ownership on the individual or the consumer. So care is influenced, it's relational, but also wildly uneven. To communicate these tensions of care within and beyond the swimming communities at Windermere, I co-produced a research zine working with the very talented local illustrator Bethan Thorsby, or Sporadic Illustration, as you might know her. The zine combined Bethan's local connection to Windermere, my ethnographic reflections, but also quotes from all 40 participants to highlight the differences and complexities. The zine critically yet carefully contextualized the social and environmental concerns for swimmers, and people wanted to engage with this. The zine emphasizes the importance of general outdoor swimming safety, to take experiences of concerns of illness seriously, to practice check, clean, dry, recognizing that biosecurity has slipped off broader radars. It was also a reminder that the awareness and literacy towards other freshwater species sharing these spaces really lacking. So the zine encouraged the community to volunteer within the local conservation groups, citizen science research, reading up on freshwater ecology and its pressures, but also question different sources of information. That's how we build depth and equitable views on this topic. But notably acknowledge that our swims are political. Windermere is iconic, but it does not situate from inside of a bubble. And before I wrap up, I wanted to share the importance of taking care as a researcher, not only for others, but also for your needs too. Now, I have felt joy and privilege in facilitating these reflections with swimmers, and overall I've been shown such kindness and generosity in the community. But there have been exceptions. Being an ethnographic swim researcher among heightened water quality issues and facilitating and discussing the heavier health motivations to swim can create vulnerability for researchers. This is exciting work, but it will take over at times, and these issues are not going away. So researchers do need to look after themselves, set boundaries, push back if you need to, and please advocate for your needs. Also, avoid living in a flat with only one radiator. Oh, that was horrible, man. Yeah, less on that. It's clear that these spaces host more than mountainous views, the colour blue, or just concerns of sewage. Swimming presents entangled social and environmental tensions. Swimming can be positive, it can be negative. There can be moments of joy, playfulness, lightness, solidarity, and care. Some really powerful experiences. But there can also be nervy moments, knocks, heaviness, judgment, dismissal, ambivalence, confusion, and fear. These experiences for some can be enlivening, for others they may make people feel small and vulnerable. We all bring something different to these spaces, moods, stress, intentions, perceptions. We all have different identities, experience, abilities, and bodies. We and our shared environments are always changing. Now, I continue to receive questions and notions of whether Windermere is safe or not to swim in, or whether it's healthy, but these understandings cannot be rendered to a simple yes or no. And if I'm honest, as swimmers or researchers, we don't always know. Swimming outdoors will always carry risk, but that doesn't mean that we just accept the issues, and we just need to keep trying to learn from each other and to continue asking questions, especially of those with more power. Thank you so much for listening. I will take 2 questions, and just in the interest of time, just 2 questions only. Yes, Abby.
I had a question. I think you mentioned that only 4 of your participants had actually discussed climate change.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering, like, how you thought about that in terms of your project and whether that was a key focus or not, and why you're reflecting on the fact that only 4 people discussed that.
For me, yeah, it's interesting. Good question, thank you. I didn't prompt it in the interview questions, but I wanted to know what swimmers were aware of in terms of concerns of water quality and how they negotiate that. Many could pinpoint to what they'd heard in the news around, or in the community around localized sources, but many were unaware that there are also pressures from the lake warming as well. So that was interesting, and I for me, I got a sense that people separated that. If they sensed that Windermere was in a bubble, it's not affected not only locally, but also what happens nationally, what happens globally too. And that's it wasn't a key focus, but I got a sense that people were separating that. Thank you for your question. Yes, Hannah.
It sounds like lots of people shared really personal information with you.
Yeah.
Do you think doing it in that environment, the interviews in that environment, and maybe swimming
Yes, that's a great question.
About swimming would you repeat the question?
Yes, so Hannah's question was around whether the environment of facilitating those interviews in that environment, whether that enabled people to be able to open up more about their motivations to swim. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, any part of ethnographic work is building trust, right? And I think through the Windermere project, there was transparency from the start. I tried to document all of my sort of work on social media, and I was in the communities. I was joining the Sunday morning swims, and that started before the 12-month field work. And so I was trying to build that trust from the very start. That's why I moved to Kendal. And it was lucky that I moved into Johnny's old flat, and he introduced me to the Blue Mine Men, and that, you know, it was great. Even though it's only got one radiator, you know. But to be honest, swimmers like to talk. And there wasn't really much... Hence the 350,000 words. There wasn't much reservation in sharing, but it can get really difficult. In the water, swimming out to buoy 14, which is 250 meters, 300 meters from the shoreline, when a participant is talking about suicidal ideation while you're trying to swim, that's tough. That's really tough. And that participant, I could tell that they were trying to open up to me, and they wanted to extend that beyond the interview. They invited me to the pub afterwards, and I had to set a boundary there. I had to assess that situation and go, you know, the interview stops here. So, yeah, that's why I want to emphasise, just as researchers, new and current, look after yourself as well. Cool. Thank you ever so much.